Hello and welcome back to Refiner's Fire. We are so glad to have you guys here. My name is Peter Blute. I'm the Executive Director here at Young Catholic Professionals, YCP as we call it. And I'm excited to be back here with another amazing guest. So I am very excited to welcome Chris Wood.
Yeah.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us on the show here.
Thanks, Peter. Very excited to be here. So Thanks for having me.
So we're going to cover a lot of ground today. Some of Chris's background through various industries, his role at YCP as well. We're going to talk about community. We're going to talk about especially community of faith. But here at Refiner's Fire, we're always talking about all things with the integration of faith and work, which is our YCP mission, how we can best work and witness for Christ. So Chris, let's get into it just a little bit here, a little bit of your background, but your professional resume, engineering, corporate work, now you're in wealth advising, right? So that's the surface level of the resume.
Yeah.
What was going on underneath now these last at least 10 or 15 years? Community, I know, is a part of it, but also YCP was a key part of that story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll kind of set the stage with where I was when I first encountered YCP. So I think I was working in the corporate world in MedTech, in operations specifically, and I did that for about 15 years. And I think YCP had a really influential and was kind of an inflection point for me in a lot of different ways. One, it got me exposure to leaders that were Catholic and were really doing very impressive things in the corporate world or in their businesses, and seeing how they can live an integrated life. And that was something that was always like nagging in the back of my head about this like idea of living an integrated life with your faith and your work and your personal life and your family. I think for a long time in the corporate world was kind of like, this is my corporate box, and then this is like my faith box over here and my family box over here, and it was kind of very separate. So
it's a hard way to live life.
It is a hard way to live life. So it's like there's got to be a different way, right? But what I would say is when I first got involved with YCP, I was newly married. And we were kind of trying to get involved in our parish. So my wife and I, we were looking to get involved, looking to get more plugged in. I didn't really grow up with a lot of Catholic community. I went to a Catholic high school in the cornfields of Pennsylvania. Was kind of culturally Catholic, and so that's kind of the stage at which. And then I moved a couple places. I lived outside of Atlanta for a couple of years and never really had authentic Catholic community. And then when I encountered YCP, I was like, oh, well, this is different. Right? This is not what I've encountered before, because people are not only living out their faith in a really authentic way, but they're coming together to see, how we can, witness Christ in the workplace. And that was really powerful. So
just to say that a different way, would you say it's that ability to come together, but then to go back out into the world?
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And I remember actually talking to Bishop Olson at one point in time when I was, the chapter leader of the Fort Worth chapter, and talking to him about exactly that premise. It's like the value of YCP is the coming in and then going out into the workplace and into your parishes and being more empowered to have an impact there. And I think, so the first thing was, seeing these speakers that were very impressive. The second piece of being in YCP was kind of the friends. You just make friends through this, and we can talk about that. But then it was how do you have impact once you go out into your parishes? Once you kind of phase out of the young Catholic professional demographic, like how do you integrate into your parish? How do you have impact? And I was on the leadership team for almost 2 years, because it was actually, I became chapter president in 2019. So planning to, hand the reins over in 2020. Yeah. But as we know, the world kind of shut down. There was no one to hand it to, right? So there was a lot of things that went on. But what it unlocked for me is, I had volunteered at my home parish in Pennsylvania. I'd sponsored people through RCIA. I was a reader. I was on the core team for the young adult ministry, but I'd never really been a leader like in a church ministry or an apostolate or anything like that. So it kind of unlocked a little bit for me. It's like, oh, I could do this. I can be a leader in the church wherever the Lord leads me, because I
Right.
now have this template and I see how an organization works from the inside and how it can have impact. So that was a big kind of turning point for me. And then definitely my prayer deepened throughout all of this. And there was a lot of factors through that. But I do remember, you asked, your question was about like the faith life and what was going on underneath. And I remember sitting in my office at home, because I was, working from home at that point in my life. And I was just thinking to myself, is there something more that the Lord is calling me to, right? Like I literally remember sitting in my office. I was like, is this it? Am I just going to like work in this corporate environment kind of for the rest of my life and just kind of keep getting promotions, or is there something more? And that kind of leads me into where I am now with the, kind of how I got to my current role. But there was something that was kind of going on underneath. And I think YCP was a catalyst for a lot of these aspects of my life and really put me where I am today in a lot of ways. So.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I mean, I think what is profound about your story is your openness, right? You seem to have a spiritual openness to God's hand in your life. Would you say that that's the case, and has it always been the case?
It has not always been the case.
Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like, how has your spiritual life grown over those 15 or so years? Prayer deepening, you mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think a lot of it actually started after I graduated college. So, I have a typical story where your faith is kind of because your parents told you to. You go to church, every week, every Sunday. In my family, we talked a lot about theology in our home, which was interesting, but didn't really talk about like how the Lord was working in our lives, kind of how the Spirit is moving. So after college, had a reversion to the faith, and it was actually because someone invited me to be on the core team of the youth group. A good friend of mine, he invited me and said, "Hey, you should serve in this capacity." And I remember in that time, I was kind of praying sporadically, didn't really know what prayer looked like, but I remember a moment where we were out at a bar having a beer just after serving with youth group, and we were sitting there having a beer, and he asked me, he goes, how's the Lord working in your life? And I was like, I didn't know we could ask this over a beer, right? I didn't know that was a thing that you could do. I thought this had to be in the context of like church or, but it was a very, kind of, profound moment for me. And then at that same time, around that same time, I started dating, my now wife, and she grew up kind of Southern Baptist and was, non-denominational. So when we started dating, I had to really brush up on a lot of theology to know what I was talking about, so we can have those serious conversations about faith, what that looked like. So I would say it's been definitely a journey. And I was not always open to how the Lord was moving in my life. It was more like, I have this plan, and I'm going to go execute that plan, and I'm sure the Lord will help along the way.
Unless you tell me otherwise.
Yeah, unless you tell me otherwise, right? It'll be there along the way.
Yeah.
But I think what that's transitioned into now is really being open to how the Lord is prompting, in my life, and it's been a different sort of prayer. And, obviously we can go in lots of different directions with this, but I just attended a 12-week course at our parish that was on prayer and discernment.
Oh, amazing.
And it's been very powerful because it's like I would go into prayer. My MO was, all right, Lord, here's the agenda, right? I have these things that we're going to talk about today in prayer.
I can structure this all day.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So I got some asks, I got some things I'm thankful for, and we're going to go through this. And I think the shift has been more like sitting in silence and just being open to the prompting, which has then kind of facilitated some things, and I've kind of gotten some movements that has taken me in different directions. So it's been a journey.
So if I could ask, share as much as you're comfortable with, but like in those moments, silence is important.
Yeah.
I think all of us know that. It's much more difficult in practice, right? I say all of us. I hope people know the importance of silence.
Right, yeah.
If not, I hope they get to experience it soon. What is an example, or what does it feel like when you're in that silence? You're just present with our Lord. You're not necessarily asking for something.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily proactively speaking, to him or with him. But what does that look and feel like? Like, how do you discern?
Yeah.
in your life, the voice of God.
Yeah, and I am by no means an expert in any of this, right? I'm like in the midst of this grand experiment, which is our life and prayer and discernment and all of this stuff. So I love to take and steal the best things from the smartest people that I know. That comes in prayer, comes in parenting, all of those things. Like I just steal shamelessly from the best people that are doing these things. But in this,
standing on the shoulders of giants.
Exactly, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So in the course that I recently took, it talked about even if you spent an hour just redirecting yourself towards Christ, that's an hour well spent. And I think the reason I say this is because a lot of times I think we have this expectation that prayer is going to be quote unquote fruitful.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Sure.
Whatever that means. And I actually had a conversation.
I'll feel better after than I felt before.
Right,
I'll
exactly.
have more clarity after than I did before.
And I had a buddy of mine that I was having coffee with recently, and he was kind of expressing this at like, I don't feel that prayer is fruitful right now. And, what I've come to understand, again, through conversations with religious and conversations with people who are just better than I am, is that this idea of just silence, and as long as there's a peace that's associated with, like, that's fruitful. Like just sitting in prayer and having that sense of peace. Now, for me, what I've started to do more recently is actually bring like a notebook to prayer, like a journal, because what I find is that my brain like starts to like list things out. It could be like the grocery list or things I need to do with the kids, and what I'm trying to do is like download that and just like take that aside, get it out of the head, so then I can really focus on what I'm supposed to be focused on. And I think, the reason that I'm here on this podcast, which we've talked about previously, is I was sitting in adoration. I mean, it was, I don't know, a couple months ago now, and just kind of sitting in silence there, and I had my notebook there and just thinking about, Lord, what are you calling me to do in this new phase of life with the new job, which I'll talk about. And I was thinking about all sorts of manner of things. And then I had this thought that was text Jen Ball, text her. And I was not thinking about YCP. I hadn't talked to Jen in years. I was looking back through my text. That was probably 5 years ago, the last time I texted Jen, right? So I was like, well, that's odd. I'm going to write that down, right? So sure enough, I text Jen, and I end up getting coffee with her husband, Cody, and then we reconnect. And that's how I'm here, is because I was sitting in prayer, and I just got this prompting. I don't know what else to call it, right? It's not like some booming voice that's like, text Jen. But it was this prompting that was like very clear, and it was not anything that I was thinking about at that moment. So I was like, all right, let's see where this goes. And I think there's a lot of those things that we can be aware of if we just sit in silence, and we also figure out how to focus our mind. And for some of us, it's, writing. For some of us, maybe it's like music, whatever it is, like to get our mind settled so we can focus on what the Lord is calling us to.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I think it's amazing. And I think it also requires to some degree, courage, right? Because that prompting of text Jen, like, it's pretty easy to just kind of mow over that, right? You just kind of move on, and you're like, okay, that would be nice, but but there's risks, right? Like, what if she doesn't text back? What if, whatever, what if she deleted my number?
Right,
Like, who's this? Right? You're like, that's awkward. Right. I mean, those aren't huge risks. But I think we always weigh the risks in our mind. Like, what are the trade-offs, even if we aren't as conscious of them? But it requires courage to step out and say, Lord, I don't know where this is going, but I'm willing to step out and try this, because I perceive at least that you're calling me to do so, whether it's something small or something larger.
And I think that courage can come from trying to reflect back on your life and seeing how the Lord was working in your life.
Right.
And we can talk about this, but I went to a church retreat, Christ Renews His Parish, right, which is popular kind of in this area. And one of the things you do as a part of this retreat is you kind of write out your story, right? And you think about how the ways of the Lord was working in your life. And for me, when I look back, it's like very clear, right? It's like, oh, this is very clear how the Lord was doing this and why He was doing that. It did not make sense at the time, right? Some of the things that I like experienced was like, why is this going on? Why is this, why is this happening? So I think that courage can come from looking back and saying, I have assurance that I know the Lord has worked in my life in the past for good and for things that have turned into blessings. How can I be aware of that in the present? Or how can I be more open to that in the present? I'm not good at that. I can tell you that right now. I still don't see like what's going on, right? I'm like, sometimes in prayer, I'm like, what are we doing, Lord? Where are we going with this? I'm open, but I don't know where we're going. So, looking back, I think is a helpful exercise, because you can kind of see it and then maybe be open to that more in the future.
Yeah, I think that's right on. So that confidence or that assurance, right, from the past, looking back, helps us maybe a little bit at least to step forward with some or more of that confidence and assurance. So let's connect this into your professional life. So I want to get to your change from MedTech to wealth advising, but let's just talk about maybe it's in those what was almost 15 years in MedTech. But let's talk about how has that growth in your spiritual life, this class that you've been taking, which is more recent, I know, but your better understanding of how to pray, how to discern, how God is acting in your life, going to this church retreat, how has that influenced your work? How has that transformed in some small or big way the way you work?
So I think, let me just draw a quick line of kind of how I got here, and then I'll go back to answer that question. So YCP was the thing that connected me to my current parish. So I got a Good Shepherd in Colleyville, and the chaplain of the Fort Worth chapter of YCP at the time was at Good Shepherd. So I was just going to visit him, just like to see him on a weekend. He's serving the 9 o'clock mass or whatever, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go see Father Jason because I like Father Jason. He's cool. I want to see him after mass. So I go to Good Shepherd, and I think at the time, we were going to, Holy Family at the time. Nancy was actually, might have been already gone through RCA, which is a whole nother story. But so I go to this parish, Good Shepherd, and I see Father Jason. I was like, hey, nice to see you. I'll see you, at the next YCP meeting. And then I walk out the front doors, and there are guys there signing people up for church. And what was interesting was my sister, who had just moved down here at the time, was with me again for mass. My sister's 9.5 years younger than me. So it was me, my wife, and my sister. And we walk out the doors. And again, we're from Pennsylvania. So my sister's from Pennsylvania. She just moved down here a couple months ago. And she goes, I know that guy at the table who's signing up for church retreat. And I was like, how do you know the guy at the table? Like, you just moved down here a couple months ago. We're in Texas. You're from Pennsylvania. And sure enough, the guy who was at the table, him and his wife, had actually lived in my hometown for a couple of months when they were working there, and had met my sister through young adult activities there. And so she's like, oh, let me introduce you to Matt. So I go over and I get introduced to Matt, and then sure enough, I'm signed up for a church retreat, right? And I was like,
you were roped in.
I was like, how did this happen, right? I come here for a weekend and I'm signed up for a church retreat. But, fast forward through that is the way that I met my friend Logan, who founded the firm that I currently work for, Arno Wealth, and he is the managing partner and founder of that. So that's how I got into my current kind of role and industry, is through a connection at a church retreat. So I was the spiritual director for a subsequent retreat. He was on a leadership team, and we got to know each other really well. So like YCP connected me to Good Shepherd, and my sister connected me to Chirp, right? Chirp connects me to this community of people that, not only has gotten me this current role, but has also developed into small group communities with a married couples group, and just has exploded kind of my community in a way that I never thought was possible, again, growing up with not having a lot of authentic fraternity and Catholic community. So I think your question was kind of, how has that impacted you along the way? And I think, when I didn't have community and when I didn't have people around me who were really deep in their prayer life, I don't think I had a good way to discern things, right? How to really pray. But when you hear, faithful Catholics that are all striving for holiness and are, talking about their struggles and talking about the things that works well, that develops, it rubs off on you, right? Like you end up, striving for, holiness a little more, maybe going to confession more regularly, going to daily mass more regularly because your buddy does, right?
It gives you a model to sort of picture in your head.
It does.
An ideal, right?
And even a little bit of a little bit of peer pressure, right? It's like, well, I'm
some accountability too,
I'm going to mass on Friday at 6 o'clock at Cistercian, right? Do you also want to join me? Yes, I will join you for 6 o'clock, morning prayer and mass at Cistercian. So it's things like that. And then you start to develop this prayer life by being in this soup of people that are all doing the same thing. And then I think that has developed into me trying to be more aware of what's going on in my faith life, because I also see it in other people's, right? So not only looking past at my story, but also seeing how, the Holy Spirit is working in your life. I'm like, all right, I gotta be on the lookout for how, what I need to be doing differently. So it's kind of it all meshes together in a way that I never thought it would, just by standing up and saying, sure, I'll volunteer to be on the leadership team at YCP. That's how it all started. And then it's just kind of propagated into all these amazing things.
Yeah, I love it. I think of it like sparks.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, YCP
100%.
doesn't always, we can't guarantee connections, right?
Yeah.
But the opportunity is there. And these sparks are happening all the time. And it may be one spark that changes your life, that 1%.
Yep.
But you compound that out over a lifetime and you end up in a vastly different place than you would have.
Yeah.
Right? And when we start earlier in our lives, being more aware of who we're rubbing up against, those sparks that are generated and the confidence that we need to step into those things, it can dramatically shift the entire trajectory of your life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When you're starting in your 20s.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, I think, the beauty of, getting involved with, a YCP chapter very early on in your professional career is because you can start to build those connections and start to figure out how to do that like very early on, right? You're just graduating from college or, you're like, and you're really, really fresh in it. If you're going to be building this career for yourself, why not like have it on really good footing? Why not be informed by people who have gone before you and have 20, 15, 20, 25 years of experience of living this life that's integrated. So yeah, I think it's huge.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes all the difference.
It does.
It may be the very top, like the most important, right?
Yeah.
So let's go back to your work,
Yeah.
right? So you're in MedTech, you're in big corporate world. What are some of the challenges you found in practicing your faith there? What are some of the ways that you worked through that? Of course, many of our members are in similar type environments.
Yeah.
What's your guidance now, looking back over 15 plus years?
Yeah, so I think in the corporate world, there's a lot of different challenges. Obviously, depending on what industry you're in, what type of company you're in. What I would say is that I was as I attended YCP and started to build this network of community and started to be, modeled by, really impressive leaders. I was like, how can I do something similar? And I actually had an interesting interaction when I first got my last job. So I was working at I switched from one MedTech company to the other, and I was there for probably 6 months. And one of the guys that worked for me at the time, we were sitting in a conference room, working on some planning. And he goes, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." He goes, "Are you Catholic?" I was like, how do you know? Like, because honestly, I was not the person at that time that was like, doing sign of the cross before meals. Like, I wasn't doing a lot of overt things to broadcast that I was Catholic, right? But I was like, "How did you know that?" He's like, "Well, it's the way that you present yourself in situations."
Wow.
And that took me aback because I'm like, okay, people are watching, whether you're in a leadership position or not, like people are watching how you are engaging in the workplace. Fast forward to being a dad, that's also the most terrifying part of being a dad is your kids are watching you constantly, right? Not necessarily what you say, but what you do. So, not that I necessarily did anything like impressive or good in that, but I always had this in the back of my mind that's like, I want people when I'm behaving in the workplace to know that I'm Catholic and also to like view that as a positive thing, right? Not as, oh, that guy's Catholic and he's not the nicest guy, right? So it was always, how do I serve people? But, when as I was going through this journey, I also wanted to more overtly practice my faith in the workplace. And in the company that I was working for, they actually had an employee resource group, like an ERG, that was actually a Christian employee resource group. So what I got to do on Wednesdays was have a little Bible study with coworkers of mine, in the workplace, and lots of different denominations. Some Catholics, some different Christians, and it was a really cool experience for me to talk about my faith as a Catholic, which some of those folks maybe never had an interaction with someone that was like truly and authentically Catholic, or even knew what they were talking about as it pertains to their Catholic faith. So I think I was always kind of looking for ways to really live out my faith in the workplace. But what I came to realize was that for me, I was still not living like an integrated life, right? I wanted to be living something where my work and my faith and my family and everything was really integrated. That was a word that kept coming to my head, was like living an integrated life. And like I said, that one time I was sitting in my office just kind of praying, and I was like, Lord, is there something more that you're calling me to? And that's when I got connected with,
There was a knock on the door.
There was a knock on the door. Yeah,
that text
the
message
doorbell
went up.
No, but it was this awareness that like this is not it. This is not all that you're going to do. And not to denigrate, right, the corporate life or corporate world, because I think that's a really positive and good career path.
And many need to,
right?
To be in that space.
Absolutely. So,
right?
But there was something that I was like thinking or yearning for that allowed me to have that openness. And then, it took kind of several years of the transition from the corporate world into, kind of wealth management and with the firm that I'm in now. And it really started with community and relationship, was fueled by openness and discernment, and then obviously taking that jump to take actions along that path. So for me to transition from the corporate world, engineering, into kind of finance and wealth management, I had to take multiple licensing exams. I had to take the SIE and the 63 and the 65 and the 82. So it wasn't like I could just sit back and be like, all right, Lord, like whatever you want. It's like, no, I got to take action. I had to take action. And there's in that. You can fail some of those exams, right? So there's a risk there, or it can take, time to study. And so all of that to be said, that I knew the Lord was calling me to something. And one of the big prayers that I've had recently over the past year is like, Lord, open the doors that are intended to be open and close the doors to make it clear for me where you want me to go. And a good example of that is, as I was kind of making this decision, I was actually passed over for a promotion that was I'd actually been doing the job on an interim basis. So I was running the site. I was a site leader for 9 months running the site. We had some of the best metrics we've had in 2 years, right?
You
so
were
it was like
shoo-in, right?
I was you would think like on paper it's like, okay, this is a shoo-in. And then when I don't get the promotion, that was a relief, because it was like, oh, this is a very clear door closed. Like, thank you, God. I think in the past, if it had been early career, I would have been crushed, because my work was my identity. And if I do bad in my work, then I'm
strikes at your core.
Yeah,
right?
where am I? So I can talk for hours about past career and how it's changed how I respond to things in work. But that was a perfect example of all this prayer and discernment was like, great, open doors and closed doors, and I'm walking through the open doors.
Yeah.
So.
That's an amazing prayer. I love that. What you just said, I think, is really strikes at the core of the transformations we're seeing at YCP, right? Is that the world tells us that we need to place our identity in things outside of ourselves.
100%.
Right? And there is a plethora of places we can do that, right? It can be a relationship, whether or not it's healthy for us. That can be our identity. It can obviously be work. Like there's addictions related to work that we need to be aware of, and tons of other things where we're placing our identity. It could be the nice car I just bought. It could be, whatever. What made you realize that your identity was outside of being placed in God's hands, coming, flowing from God? Yeah.
Well, it definitely, I would have to say,
I guess what were the symptoms of that too?
Yeah.
Right?
So I would say the recognition came, again, when I was maybe not in leadership for YCP, but attending some of these talks, because I was seeing these people that were very successful and their identity was clearly in Christ.
Yeah.
So this was something that I was like, oh, this is different than what I'm maybe either striving for or aware is possible, right? Where these people were living that life where very, very successful in worldly standards, but also their identity was in Christ. And I would say the symptoms of not having that, and I'll speak personally, was that when things went awry at work, it was kind of like all-encompassing, right? So there was actually a time in my career where I was in an accelerated management development program, and I actually got basically kicked out of the program. And we can talk about all the reasons why. It wasn't anything nefarious. It was performance related, right? So for me, it was like, well, this is devastating, because if I'm not this person who's going to get this promotion and get this thing that I'm striving for, then what am I? What's going on? And I, a lot of it was just maturity. It's like, hey, there are some things that you do when you're in early career that you're like, yeah, that's not great, right? You need to mature. You need to fix those things. That's what a lot of it was. But even in that. Not proceeding forward with that development program allowed me to stay in Texas. So allowing me to stay in Texas allowed me to connect with YCP and serve on the leadership team. Awesome. And here we are. So that was one where I was like, that's a really clear one where the Lord was working in my life, but I was not happy at the time, right? I was like, this is not what I want to be doing. I have this vision for my life and I'm executing it and it's all in my control. And I think that's the other thing. If people are talking a lot about the things that they're controlling, that's a symptom of it, right? Because if they think that there's this control that they have, any semblance of control, like that is they're just off the mark. So for me, that idea of controlling and holding on to things, there needs to be a level of detachment, whether that's of money, of things, cars, of jobs, of relationships, like all of this stuff, anything that we're like holding really, really tightly, that's something we need to examine. And what better time? We're going into Lent. Well, I don't know when this will come out, but we're going into Lent soon, right? So it's like that's a perfect time to think about those attachments. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Detachment, relinquishing control would lead to so much more peace in our lives if we just did that. Yeah. Right? In silence.
Yeah, exactly.
All that together.
Yeah.
So I do want to touch on, you and I are both dads. Yeah. Now we're in that next phase, right? We started early on in YCP. We're now married. I just had my fourth kid. You've got a fourth on the way.
Yep.
Talking about your marriage, family life, your role as a father, especially as a spiritual leader of your family, how has that changed how you define success?
Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming it changed. Right. Success from our conversation.
Absolutely has.
Talk a little bit about that.
And it's interesting you bring up like the spiritual, leadership or headship of the family. We actually, out of this chirp and some of the community that's developed from there, at Good Shepherd, we have a group that's called Bonfire Banter, and it's a monthly men's group that meets on a Friday at 8:00 at night. Outside in someone's backyard, and we, drink whiskey, smoke cigars, and talk about theology. And one of the recent topics was on spiritual headship. So it's just funny that you bring that up. So there's been a lot of discussion around this recently, and it's really important to recognize the obligation that we have. But all that aside, I want to give a shout out to Bonfire Banter. So, but yeah. So what I would say is that as a dad, the moment that you hold your first kid, like things change, right? At least that was my experience, where it's like, oh, I have a different responsibility now than I did moments ago. Because, when your wife is pregnant with your first child, she's got a relationship with the kid. Like you're kind of like talking.
Nothing changes for us until the moment.
Exactly. You're kind of talking to the kid. You're getting kicked maybe in the hand. But as soon as you hold the kid, it's like, okay, something's different. And every dad has a different reaction. Like some reactions are very emotional. Some are like fear or whatever it is. But what I would say is that the more I dove into what it means to be a father, the more the idea of success changed. So I did think I had a false idea that, I'll just have kids and then things will kind of like continue on as they were before. Not in the way that like the life would be the same, but like my plans and my career will just be the same because that's what I'm going to do.
They'll just kind of run on parallel.
They'll just run in parallel.
Right?
Yeah, they'll be kind of symbiotic and they'll run on parallel paths. And what I came to understand was that my primary vocation, first of all, is as a husband, right? So that's something we emphasize to our kids a lot is like, Nancy and I, this is the primary vocation, right? Like you guys are an overflow of this and we're very grateful that you're here, but like this is the primary vocation. So putting a lot of effort and emphasis and work into that has been a focus of ours for the past several years. But then when I think about your obligation as a father, and actually it's funny, I was on a podcast that Good Shepherd did, and the topic was on parenting. So we had a lot of discussions on this, and this is another place where like, I don't know any of the answers because I'm in the midst of an experiment, right? Like we'll find out if any of these things we're doing are good in the next 20, 30, 50 years, right? But as a parent, you realize that your obligation really is to help them develop a relationship with Christ. Mm-hmm. You obviously want them to be productive and well-rounded members of society, but like everything that you're oriented towards, is first towards your wife and then to the kids, where you really want them to learn how to love Jesus, have a relationship with you so that when things go awry in life, they have someone to come to, and then help them to like figure out what their vocation is. So when I think about that, and I was thinking about kind of my corporate trajectory and just the company that I was working at and kind of where it was going, is I was gonna have to move kind of multiple different places. That's kind of how promotions work in operations. You kind of have to move to different things. It was likely going to be another state, like in the Midwest somewhere. And that was another, discernment for my wife, Nancy, and I. It's like, is this what we want to do? Do we want to like move our family around every like 2 to 3 to 4 years? And some people are okay with that. Like, some people are like, yeah, like it's an adventure. We're going to meet new people, right? But for us, it was like, this is not what we want for our life. This is not what we want for our kids. And how am I going to be most present for our kids is that if I have a work project, so to speak, that allows me to be more integrated, right? Allows me to be more present with the kids and all those things. So I think that's been kind of the journey for me, is the obligation we have to help our kids, become saints, right? And what is it going to take in all the other elements of our life to support that? Because at the end of the day, I want our family to worship God in all that we do, in every aspect of our life. And one small thing that we've done, which I've stolen from a friend of ours, is establishing a family rule of life, right? So we have, on our fridge, the kind of the family rule of life, and then some specific rules that we do. Like, we do hard things, and we always tell the truth, and we listen to God's voice, and we seek solutions. And it's kind of a working document. It's not, it's not hard coded yet because it's being refined. So I have a pen that every time something comes up, I'll like mark it up. But like, how do I get our family oriented towards the ultimate goal, which is worshiping God in all that we do? So it's been a huge change of kind of like my mindset.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think there's so much overlap here. I mean, many who are active on YCP right now are single, right? They're discerning their primary vocation. Most of them are going to be called to marriage, right? So I think in a sense, our conversation is a glimpse on at least two guys trying to figure it out.
Right. Exactly.
But I think a lot of what has been poured into me, and you referenced this as well, from the speakers and the mentors, the role models that I met through YCP, is how to integrate, to use your word, your life more completely, regardless of where you are professionally, what size company you're in, et cetera. Like, I learned what you said about your marriage coming first, relationship with God, your marriage, relationship with your spouse, and only after that, your kids. I learned that from Jeff speaking at YCP, right? And that was profound. That was like reorienting for me, right? Now, luckily, I heard it before I was married, and I'm still trying to get good at that.
Of course.
But I think there's glimpses of that because the people who are speaking and participating in YCP, most of them are married. Most of them have grappled with various parts of how do I raise flourishing children? How do I have a strong faith-filled, faith-grounded marriage? And also, how do I succeed in work? We are called to do good work, right? And that often comes with making more money. It often comes with, the kind of prestige that can come with influence in our roles, our professional lives especially, and all that's okay. All of that is God-given as long as it's oriented. Going back to the identity piece, it's oriented towards Him. It's oriented towards the ultimate end of being sanctifying, so we can get to heaven, right? But a lot of that I learned at YCP too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you talked about this journey that I've had kind of, from the corporate world into wealth management. And one of the things I realized going back to the attachment piece was that I was attached to some of the titles. Like, I was like, oh, if I can just get this title, then I'll be good, then I'll be happy, then I'll be successful. And I think, having some of that, detachment for whatever it is, I think is really important. And another thing that you just said was you have a lot of people in YCP who are single, right? And they're discerning their vocation. I do think it's comical is maybe too flippant of a word, but comical where people think that they're going to discern the vocation of marriage without actually first understanding how to pray and discern, the voice of God, right? So I think it's like we get so rushed to find our vocation and figure out what God's call is for our life. It's like, okay, so are you praying every day, right? Because if you're not praying every day, you're unlikely to have that clarity
Right.
and the space for the Lord to speak into your life for that discernment. And I think, going back to, I wish I had, YCP when I was, first dating my wife at that point in time, because I think, when I first started dating her, we kind of met in interesting circumstances. We were long distance for our entire relationship. We met through mutual friends, but she grew up Southern Baptist and non-denominational kind of when I was dating her. And I remember the discernment process at that time was like, are we bringing each other closer to Christ? Right. And is the Lord working in a positive way? It's going back to that, like that peace, that idea of like, there's peace in this because we're moving in the right direction. So even when we got married, she, was not Catholic yet. She went through RCIA after that. But it was this idea of like, we're discerning together that like, is the Lord working in this? But you first have to have that individual prayer life to figure out what that might feel like or what that might look like. So I think sometimes we get the cart before the horse when it comes to, vocation, discernment a little bit. So
yeah, I think you're right on. I think you're right on there. And also that everything we do in life leading up to when we're married and have kids can help prepare us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or distract us, right? Yeah. Like those are the two ends of the spectrum. I just think about now being on the other side, having kids, trying to help instill a virtuous life, a life well lived in virtue in them, and all the parallels I see with also leading a team.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like it's all virtue. Like you're either moving towards God or you're moving away from God.
Yeah.
Right. And there's so many parallels, right? And so how you're operating at work, how you're working on a team, if you're at a point now where maybe you are leading people, whether you're directly or indirectly leading them, all of those things prepare us for a future stage of life, future stages of life, right? It's all about growing in holiness, growing in prayer and discernment, finding quiet, understanding what it means to live a life heroically in virtue.
Yeah.
On our path to sainthood, right? And whether you're married now or whether you have kids now or whether you even know what God is calling you to in that primary vocation, religious life, some, you can be developing everything else
absolutely
in preparation for that, right?
Yeah.
And that's necessary, like you said.
Yeah.
Absolutely necessary. All right, we're coming to the end of our show here. Last question for you. We call this Refiner's Fire. How do you think God is refining you today?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is through, it's through parenthood. A lot of that is through marriage and parenthood, because what I am being held to is the expectation of my kids. And one of the things that's very interesting is that I know that the way I behave for my kids is in some way going to inform for them the vision of the Father. So when there are things that I struggle with, like anger or impatience, if I let that come out, and I do sometimes, right? I try not to. I know that is going to influence how they view God the Father, and that's a big responsibility. So when I think about that, it changes the way I interact with my wife. It changes the way I interact with my kids.
How can it not?
How can it not? Right. And then, kind of in the workplace with this new work endeavor that I'm doing, it really is about how can I best serve people that I'm working with, my clients and my coworkers, but then also how is the Lord drawing me deeper into Catholic community and living an integrated life. So I think in one respect, it's at home where I'm being like refined to be the father and the husband that God is calling me to be. And it's a struggle every single day. And then in the workplace, I think it's very much figuring out how to have that impact in a way that is detached from all the things that I think are important and I think indicate success, and really just fulfilling, whatever that thing that God is calling me to.
Amen. That's it. Mic drop.
All right. Here we go.
Thank you so much for coming, Chris.
Thank you, Peter.
And
This
thank
was
you for
great.
your leadership as well as president and former president of the YCP Fort Worth chapter, and all you've poured into YCP, and it's overflowed into so many others, including both of us.
That's right.
So
Awesome. Well,
thanks
thank
so
you,
much
Peter.
for being
This is
here.
awesome. Appreciate it.
And thank you guys for joining us. We'll be back soon with more episodes of Refiner's Fire. By the way, if you have anyone who you think should be on this show, reach out to us. Let us know. You can see we sometimes bring members and leaders on. We bring our speakers, mentors, and the unbelievable Catholic professional role models that we encounter through YCP. Let us know if you have someone in mind, and we'll see you at a YCP event soon.